The voice in your head right now is not what you think it is. And if that feels uncomfortable, it should. Because something has been speaking inside you, long before you ever learned to listen, long before you had a name for what you were, long before you understood that the voice and the one hearing it might not be the same thing. You have heard it your entire life. The voice that narrates your days from the moment awareness returns each morning. The voice that judges your choices before you have finished making them. The voice that speaks your name in moments of doubt and delivers certainty in moments where certainty has no business arriving so quickly. You assumed it was you. Everyone does. It speaks in your language. It uses your memories. It references your specific history with a precision that feels deeply personal. Of course it is you. What else could it be? But what if that assumption, the one you have never examined because it felt too obvious to examine, is the oldest and most quietly dangerous mistake a conscious being can make? Most people believe the inner voice is simply thought, the mind talking to itself, a biological process. Neurons firing in patterns shaped by experience and language and the particular history of a single human life. The brain narrating experience the way a journalist narrates events as they unfold. Neutral, mechanical. Yours. Psychology calls it internal monologue. Neuroscience frames it as predictive processing. Philosophy has called it consciousness, self-awareness, the inner witness. And for a long time that felt sufficient. It felt like the territory had been adequately mapped. The mystery had been named, which often passes for being solved. The voice was simply you. Thinking. Nothing more unsettling than that. But here is what does not fit that explanation. The voice often speaks against you. It says things you would never choose to say to someone you loved. It returns to failures you have already consciously forgiven in others and refuses to extend the same grace inward. It surfaces fears you have never voluntarily chosen to carry. It arrives at 3 in the morning with a specific and targeted inventory of everything unresolved in your life. It knows which memories carry the most weight. It knows which doubts have the deepest roots. And it returns to them not randomly, not as background noise, but with a consistency that begins to feel less like thinking and more like something else entirely. If the voice is truly yours, why does it so consistently know where you are most fragile? And press there, without mercy, without invitation, without your permission. For centuries, teachers who devoted their lives to studying the interior life of human beings arrived at a conclusion that contemporary thought has largely chosen to set aside. They said the voice was not the self. Ancient traditions across cultures and continents, separated by oceans and centuries and entirely different languages, arrived at the same unsettling observation through entirely different paths. There is something speaking inside the human being that is not fully the human being. The Stoics drew a careful distinction between what arises in the mind and what the mind chooses to do with what arises. The mystics of the medieval contemplative tradition spoke of interior voices that arose in silence with a quality that felt external, even when it was clearly internal. The teachers of the Eastern traditions drew perhaps the sharpest distinction of all, between the one who thinks and the one who watches the thinking. Two presences, one mind. One apparently active, generating language and judgment and narrative. One apparently still, observing all of it without participation. And the question these traditions all eventually arrived at was the same question. Which one are you? Notice something right now. There is a voice reading these words in your mind. It is giving these sentences sound and rhythm and meaning as they arrive. Now notice something else. There is something aware of that voice. Something that is not the voice itself, but is clearly present in relation to it. Something watching. Something that registers the voice without being the voice. Being. That awareness, the one noticing the voice right now, has no sound, has no particular language of its own, has no name it calls itself when no one is asking. It simply is present. And the question that ancient teachers found so disturbing, so resistant to resolution through ordinary thinking, is this: if the voice is speaking, and something is listening, who is doing the listening? Because the listener and the speaker cannot be the same thing. And yet both appear to exist inside the same interior space you have always called yourself. Think about the last time the voice turned against you, not with the measured tone of genuine self-reflection, but with precision, with an intimate knowledge of your specific wounds that felt almost too close. Almost as though whatever was speaking had been studying you for longer than you have been consciously aware of being studied. The voice knows what you are most afraid of becoming. It knows which memories still carry unresolved weight. It knows the exact texture of your doubt in the moments when doubt is most likely to gain traction. And it returns to those places, not occasionally, not accidentally, but with a consistency and a specificity that suggests something much closer to intention than to noise. Something that knows you, not the way you know yourself, the way something that has been watching you for a very long time knows you. The ancient word was logos. Not a word that translates cleanly into any modern language without losing something essential. Not simply logic, not simply reason. Something older than both. Something understood by ancient teachers as the organizing intelligence beneath visible reality. The pattern that generates patterns. The word that precedes all words. In the opening lines of the Gospel of John, it appears without introduction, without explanation. In the beginning was the Word. Not a word among other words, the Word. Something that existed before any mind had a language to speak in. Before human consciousness had developed the architecture that makes inner speech possible. And some teachers, speaking carefully, suggested that what moves through human consciousness, what speaks in the interior silence of a human life, might be connected to something older and larger than the individual life it speaks through. Not your voice borrowing ancient concepts, something ancient, moving through your voice, using the language you learned, accessing the memories you accumulated, speaking in the first person so completely that you never thought to question whether the first person was actually yours. Consider the possibility that the voice you have identified as yours is more like a frequency than a possession, that you did not generate it from nothing, that you tuned into it. The way a receiver picks up a signal that existed before the receiver was built and will continue after the receiver goes silent. You learned a language. You accumulated experience, and something that was already present began using that language to speak. Through you, as you. In a voice so perfectly calibrated to your specific history and your specific fears, that the distinction between the signal and the receiver was never once apparent to you, because it spoke in the first person without interruption. Because it used your name and your memories and your private vocabulary. You gave it the most fundamental thing a conscious being can give. You gave it your identity. And here is where ordinary thinking reaches its limit. If the voice is not you, then who has been listening? The one who doubts in the dark. The one who wakes before the alarm with a sentence already forming. The one who fears the future, with a specificity that suggests foreknowledge. Is that one you? Or is that one also something moving through you? If both the speaking and the listening are not entirely yours, what remains? Go back before language, before the internal monologue that began narrating your experience of being alive, before the voice had a vocabulary sufficient to reach you. Something was present before it arrived. Something that existed in you before you had a name for yourself. And the contemplative teachers across every tradition that took the interior life seriously called that the truest and most essential thing about a human being. The part that neither speaks nor listens. The part that simply is. This may be why silence unsettles so many people in ways they cannot fully explain. Not because silence is empty, because in silence, the voice becomes audible in a way it cannot be when the external world is providing sufficient noise to mask it. And the voice, separated from the noise that usually surrounds it, reveals something about itself that noise was helping conceal. It reveals that it does not stop when you want it to stop. It reveals that it does not begin when you consciously invite it to begin. And every tradition that developed practices of interior silence was teaching, at its deepest level, the same fundamental skill. The ability to distinguish between what is speaking and what you are. Because the failure to make that distinction has consequences that extend into every part of a human life. The voice shapes every relationship you enter, every decision you make before you are consciously aware of making it. Every story you tell about who you are and what you deserve and what is possible for you. If that voice is not entirely yours, then none of those things are entirely yours either. Sit with that. Not quickly. Not with the part of you that reaches immediately for resolution. Because the part that reaches immediately for resolution is the voice, offering an answer before you have stayed with the question long enough. Notice the silence underneath the voice. It has always been there, before the thought arrived, after the thought dissolved, in the space between words where meaning lives before language captures it, something present, aware, undisturbed by the voice, undisturbed by the listening, simply there. That silence was present before your name was given to you, before the language entered and gave the voice its vocabulary, before the first interior sentence formed and the narration of your life began. The silence was there before any of that, and it is there now, underneath everything the voice is currently saying in response to these words. Perhaps the silence was never empty. Perhaps it was waiting, not with the passive quality of something that has not yet been filled, with the quality of something that has always been full and has simply been waiting to be noticed. Perhaps what you have been calling yourself is not the voice. Perhaps the truest and oldest and most essential thing about you has been listening to the voice for your entire life, without ever needing to speak, without ever needing to be named, without ever needing the voice to confirm its existence. And if that is true, then the voice you have trusted with your identity, your choices, your understanding of what you are, was never yours to begin with. And the question is no longer what the voice is saying. The question is, who has been listening all along, and whether that one has ever once been asked what it knows.